There's a poem by the American poet Mary Oliver called Tecum Seh. It's about another genocide, the genocide of the Native American people, and it contains this line: "There is a sickness worse than the risk of death, and that's forgetting what we should never forget." I came across this on the website of the Genocide Scholars Association, who last week added their judgment to the body of lawyers, human rights organisations, who have declared that Israel's actions in Gaza since October 2023 meet the definition of genocide. I quote these words here because part of the work of this tribunal is to add to the historical documentation of these crimes. But this tribunal is, of course, sitting at a moment when the genocide is not ended, and horrifically, incomprehensibly, unimaginably, may be entering its worst and most barbaric stages, with the unfolding famine caused by Israel's imposition of a complete siege on Gaza following its tearing up of the ceasefire in March, and now, of course, exacerbated and worsened by the launch of the intensified military assault on Gaza City as a prelude to the forced removal of every Palestinian to the south, eventually, according to openly declared plans, to be corralled into what can only be described as a concentration camp to be built on the ruins of Rafah, what was described in exactly those terms by the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, all as a prelude, again, to the openly discussed possible mass expulsion of all Palestinians from Gaza. When I came across that poem, I was reminded of some other words I heard spoken many years ago in Trafalgar Square at a PSC rally by the then Palestinian ambassador Afif Safir. He said this: "Do not make the mistake of presuming in the inevitability of progress. Do not make the mistake of presuming in the certainty of the liberation of the Palestinian people. There is another possible future mapped out for us. It is that we become the Native Americans of the Middle East." He was talking about what Jeff Halper was talking about earlier, Israel's long-standing plan for the complete erasure of the Palestinian people and its possible enactment through mass killing and mass expulsion. I remember when I heard those words, with everything I knew about the driving logic of Zionism and what it had led to, that I did not think it possible, with all the institutionalized infrastructure of human rights and international law, that Israel would be allowed in the 21st century to enact a crime on such a scale. And yet here we are, nearly 2 years in, and as we have heard, more than 63,000 slaughtered, uncounted thousands buried under the rubble, more than 143,000 people injured, and the destruction of all of the infrastructure of life in Gaza. Now, there are others better placed than me to detail the scale and shape of these crimes, including the scale of their human impact. They have all done so throughout the morning in forensic and visceral detail. I, like most of you, have witnessed this from afar. Although Palestinian, I have no family in Gaza, indeed no family anywhere in historic Palestine. All of my relatives were expelled in 1948 or forced into exile soon after that. So what I've been asked to do today is to say something, echoing Jeff Halper's contribution, about how we got here and Britain's role in how we got here. That seems to me to be an essential part of making sure we do not forget what we should not forget. And so we have to address two fundamental truths. The first is that history did not begin on October the 7th, that this genocide is built on the foundations of an incremental genocide, decades old, 76 years of settler colonization, occupation, and apartheid, and imposition across all of historic Palestine from the river to the sea, of what B'Tselem, in its 2021 report detailing the realities of apartheid, described as a regime of Jewish supremacy existing from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and the second enduring truth, that this system of oppression could not and has not been sustained without the complicit active support of Western governments, public bodies, companies and corporations. And we know that British complicity in supporting this regime of oppression extends back over 100 years to that initial support of the Zionist project that led to the Balfour Declaration. Remember the words of Balfour justifying his declaration, that the interests of Zionism were of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. It is possible to argue that in all essential elements, British policy towards the Palestinian people since that time has been marked by a continual refusal to acknowledge that fundamental dynamic of racist domination which was the driving logic of the Zionist project. It endured that complicit support throughout the 18 years following the establishment of the State of Israel, when Palestinian citizens were forced to live under martial law. It has endured throughout the 58 years of illegal occupation of Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and the establishment of illegal colonies across those territories. It has endured through 18 years of blockade on Gaza and periodic brutal military assaults on the territory. It endured even when human rights organisations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty and B'Tselem provided comprehensive reports detailing the reality of apartheid across all of historic Palestine. It has endured throughout the horrors we have seen in the live stream genocide over the past 2 years. None of that has been enough to disrupt a policy of enduring support for Israel based on the lie that it is a liberal democratic state which should be treated as an ally rather than a state practicing crimes against humanity, including now the crime of genocide, a state that should be subject to a comprehensive body of sanctions, a state that no one should sell arms to, no one should do business with, no one should cooperate with militarily, politically, diplomatically, until its system of racist oppression has been fully dismantled. And the additional aspect of the policy of successive governments, which has reached a height, or if you prefer, a low in the last 2 years, is to devote energy not just to support for this project of racist oppression, but to active suppression of opposition to it from British citizens. We saw this under previous Tory administrations who attempted to bring in a law to prevent public bodies from making decisions to divest from companies complicit in supporting Israel's crimes. We've seen it over the last 2 years in the unprecedented usage of the Public Order Act to impose conditions upon the national marches that we have been organising, including banning marches on the grotesque basis that they are a threat to the Jewish community if they pass anywhere in the vicinity of a synagogue, and the issuing of charges against leaders of the movement, including myself, for protesting those restrictions. We see it right now in the grotesque decision to designate Palestine Action, a group using non-violent direct action to target Elbit Systems, Israel's leading arms manufacturer, as a terrorist group, and now the farcical spectacle of the arrests of those holding up placards to protest against that prescription. So right now, our urgent task is to end the genocide and to prevent the intended erasure of the Palestinian people. This will not occur without external pressure placed on Israel through the imposition of sanctions, But those sanctions must be directed at not just ending the genocide, but then dismantling the entire structure of apartheid. Within the solidarity movement, we see our ongoing task as building the mass movement required to ramp up pressure on government to impose such sanctions, including a full two-way arms embargo, but also on public bodies and complicit companies and corporations. The stakes really could not be higher. The last 2 years have demonstrated another truth asserted for decades by Palestinian civil society, that their struggle for liberation is integral to all struggles against systems of oppression. Eric Cantona, one of my personal heroes, spoke to this truth recently when he said, if Gaza is lost, then humanity is lost. If this genocide is allowed to unfold to its last stages, or even if stopped, if Israel's system of racist domination continues to be supported, then the wider struggles against the far rights and their doctrines of ethno-nationalism, the battle for the preservation of any system of international law, and the battle to preserve fundamental democratic freedoms, including the right to protest, will also be irreparably damaged, if not lost forever.
Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you, Ben, for that very, very powerful contribution and the way you've put it to the inquiry this morning. Thank you for taking part. In your long experience of campaigning, do you believe that public opinion is now better informed and more focused on the issues of Palestine and Gaza, or do you feel that it's going in the other direction?
I would say it is significantly better informed, and particularly over the last 2 years. And I mean, Jeff Holper talked about this when he talked about the stages of implementing a system of racist domination. And part of that is narrative control. And part of that is convincing people to regard what is happening as something normal, to regard Israel as a liberal democratic state. I think what people have witnessed over the last 2 years has fundamentally shifted their understanding of that narrative. And that, to me, is what has fueled what has been unprecedented waves of solidarity globally, specifically here in the UK, not just manifested in the demonstrations which have been of unprecedented size and duration, but in the energy that people have been putting into campaigns calling for public bodies to divest, the energy people have been putting into campaigns targeting complicit companies like Barclays, and we're also seeing the impact of all of that. The horrendous paradox at the moment is there is a fundamental shift in public opinion. In all sorts of ways, Israel is more isolated in a court of global public opinion than it has ever been, but none of that has been enough to shift the dynamics of governmental behavior, and that has enabled this genocide to continue.